who say that we need less democracy, but better outputs for people. And this in the literature is called epistocracy. So let's have those who know govern. But this is also something that does happen in practice, at least in some countries. In Italy, for example, every time that there is a crisis of the government, they are not able to deal with some issues. The president appoints a technocrat as a prime minister, not elected, and then he or she, who is he, appoints half of the government ministers, also with technocrats, not elected. Okay? But there's another answer, and it's on this answer that I've been focusing on, which is to say that the crisis of democracy should be addressed by more democracy, namely by giving people more channels for participating in political life. So it is in that context that there is a whole subfield in political science called democratic innovations, where in particular citizens' assemblies are used as a tool to enhance or empower citizen participation in democracy. So I speak of citizens' assemblies, but in the political science jargon, we call them deliberative mini-publics. So I will, for the rest of my presentation, I will use this term, deliberative mini-public. And basically the idea is that through a random selection, sortation procedure, based on the official register of residents of a given city or canton or even the national level, you select a certain number of people for the mini public. It can be between 20, 100, or even more, who then use the deliberative method, which is a particular method of exchanging their views, trying to reach a consensus. Not necessarily a requirement, but basically the people treat each other with respect and also without having necessarily preset minds or opinions on a given topic of their discussion. So they are basically very open to change their views if they are convinced by a better argument of other people. So yes, the OECD in its 2020 report speaks of a deliberative wave nowadays in many democracies. So these mini publics have been organized in many countries. In Switzerland, we have been rather late in this development. We started, our very first pilot was in 2019 in the city of Sion, the capital of Valais or Valais. But since then, about more than a dozen, 14 mini publics have been organized in Switzerland, demonstrating that, or showing that even in Switzerland, in spite of direct democracy that we already have, there is a strong interest in such forms of democratic innovations. Yeah, and this at all levels. So we have collaborated with municipalities, with cantons, but also at the national level. This November, there will be a Swiss Citizens Assembly of 100 people starting in meeting in Zurich during one weekend, and they will meet until at the end of March on the topic of rising health costs and what can be done to address this problem. Okay, so why can I not? Okay, so this is just one picture of from our very first mini public in Sion. It was the last day when they unanimously accepted the final report that they made. So the question is, well, why these mini publics? What is the interest in having them? Well, I said on the one hand, it's certainly, generally speaking, one of the possible answers, not necessarily the solution of everything, but one of the possible solutions to address the crisis of democracy. But generally speaking, the advantages are as follows. The idea is that they can help to improve the quality of political decisions. They can enhance political trust. That's another indicator of crisis of democracy, that in many countries the trust in institutions and politicians is declining. Not so much in Switzerland, but in many, many countries. There's also the idea that they can help reduce polarization in societies, which is a topic of growing concern in many places. Think only of the United States, but not only. But also that they can help promote equality and inclusiveness. It's about this aspect that I will now focus more. Because sortition as a method of selection can be seen as a tool for improving political equality. Because of course, when you select people through random selection, at the very beginning, everybody has exactly the same chance of being selected. And equality being, of course, the core principle of democracy as such, this is a powerful message that sortition has. So briefly, can you see everything? Just to show you how does it work. So basically, if we have citizens of a given city, canton, whatever, they can be citizens who are nationals of the country, but you can also use the register of all residents, including foreign residents, as we did in many of our mini publics. You do a first random selection, which is a pure random selection. So electronically, on the basis of the official register, you randomly select about 2,000 to 3,000 people. So these people are invited to participate. Are you interested in participating in the mini public? Knowing that in the end, the mini public will have perhaps 22, 25, 30 people. At the national level, we have 100, but usually mini publics are between 20, 25 people. But of course, it is not compulsory to participate. So they have to say, yes, I will, or yes, I want. So among those people who say, yes, I want, it's about, in our experiments, it's about 8 to 10% of those who are invited. We have to proceed with the second step of the sortition process, which is stratified sortition, meaning that we want a mini public to be more or less descriptively representative of the population as a whole. And because at this step, there is a so-called self-selection bias. People who are already interested in politics or already tell us that they vote almost always or very frequently, of course, you will find more of those people among the group who say, yes, I want. But you will always find also people who say, no, I never vote, for many, many reasons, very often because they don't trust. Or I vote very not so often. So in the stratified sortition, you need to wait a little bit. So we have a special software doing this. So there's a random thing going on, but you give them some ranges of representation. You say among, let's say, 20 members of mini public, we want to have at least 3 to 5 of those who say, no, I never vote. So we want to make sure, but still it's a random process. There's also self-selection bias, of course, with regard to the educational background, because people with high education tend to say more frequently, yes, I want. But still, you always have people with low education background who also say, yes, I want. So we want to make sure that they are more or less fairly represented. It does not have to be, precise, very, very precise. The mini public does not work in isolation from the political system. So there are meetings with experts who need to be impartial on the given topic, with stakeholders, political parties, interest groups. The media are also invited to observe the process, or to cover the process. And then, of course, there is the interaction with the polity. Parliament, government, public administration, it depends also on the topic. Then we have two very basic models. I don't want to go too much into details, but you can have one model which we call vertical, where let's say the mini public discusses the topic of climate change. We had such mini publics in a couple of cities in the canton of Zurich, Uster, for instance, Winterthur, where the people of that city had to say, what do they think, what city should municipal authorities could do in order to do something against climate change and so on. And so they provide a set of recommendations that are then sent to the polity, municipal government, so on, who then of course typically engage to seriously consider these considerations, to say what they can accept and what not, and if they cannot accept something, they have to explain why, etc. Of course, there is no obligation to follow the recommendations. But there's a second model, which I call horizontal model, where the mini public has the task to discuss the topic of an upcoming referendum or popular initiative, and to provide an objective resume of the enjeu, obviously, of the main points of the referendum, and the main three arguments why do they think somebody should vote yes, what are the most convincing and fact-check arguments to vote yes, and what are the fact-check arguments to vote no on that referendum. So they're not that they don't provide the recommendation vote yes or no, but the idea is to help the fellow citizens to make a decision first whether or not to vote at all, and if they want to vote, what to vote. So the report of this mini public, we call it citizen statement, is then sent to all citizens who have the right to vote, of course, in this case. Okay. So this was actually the model that we used for the first time in Sion. Then we did a couple of experiments with the vertical model. But then again, with the horizontal model, what's interesting, the canton of Geneva decided this year, thanks to our projects, or after we did also pilot in Geneva, starting from this year in the canton of Geneva, there will be every year one cantonal referendum or popular initiative, where the official brochure, so to say, the statement will not come from authorities, but will come from a mini public. So 2-3 weeks ago, actually, they met for a referendum that will take place in November. So this is I see it as some kind of at least partial institutionalization of mini publics, which we started them as purely scientific and experiments rather than. Okay. Perhaps I just stop here for a second. If there is something which is not clear in this scheme, I can answer the question. Yeah, please.
The question: the group of citizens, is it just adults or also children and young people?
Yeah, we usually, if possible, sometimes it's a question also of negotiations with the public authorities. What kind of, because they have the official register and they hold the data. They don't give us the data. We always recommend to start at least with the age 16. If it was for me, I would even take younger people, but okay, let's one step after another. So starting with the age 16, and second, to include also foreign residents. Sometimes it's a bit tricky question with foreign residents if, like in Geneva, if the mini public has to give a statement on a real referendum, where only citizens with the right to vote can vote. So it can be a little bit political question that let me go into details. Okay, you have another question, perhaps, before I proceed? Yeah.
It's just a question about the ways that you see the quotas or a women selection for to be invited. Like those people reject how many women or men wants.
Yes, I will show this in a second. Okay. Other questions? No. Proceed. What you wanted to ask? Okay, so this is just to let you know. So this is the picture of the members of this Demoscan mini public. I mean, the project, we called it in Switzerland Demoscan. So you can find information under demoscan.ch. Okay. And so this was a mini public in Geneva, 2021 or 2021. And it was on the topic of a popular vote. There was a referendum, cantonal referendum. And the Canton of Geneva already, at that point, they decided to include the citizen statement in the official envelope. Because in Sion, we had to send it separately with the official because it was a federal referendum. Okay. But here, the Canton of Geneva decided to put it into the official envelope. Okay. And already looking at this picture, you see how diverse the group is. Through the method of random selection, where we did not have quotas, so to say, in terms of ethnicity, for instance, whatever ethnicity, or even we didn't have quotas in terms of foreign residents, because this mini public did include foreign residents. We did have a quota for women because in the stratified selection, one of the criteria we want to make sure that we have enough people in terms of educational background, age, socioeconomical status. In some places, political ideology, left and right, but not always. How often they vote in elections or referendums, and the gender, because we want to make sure that we have more or less 50-50 or possibly a slight overrepresentation of women in the mini public. So we make sure that this happened. But what is interesting is that already at this step, those who say, yes, I want, we have a high percentage of women and a high percentage of people with immigrant origin. Already at this step. So this is our interest now, to explain why among this group of purely randomly selected, and of course, if you have a random selection of 2,000 or 3,000 people, you can be sure because of mathematical probability, etc., that you will have more or less quite an accurate picture of the whole society. These are really statistical rules, as you are probably familiar with. But this is the problem because of self-selection bias. And here we didn't have these hypotheses at the beginning, but we discovered, I will show you some figures later on, that there's a high percentage of women and of immigrant people origin who say, yes, I want. And this is interesting because, of course, if we now look at the presence of women in parliament, this is for Switzerland. So I found it only in German. This is the Federal Statistical Office official record. So you see, municipal executives, municipal legislatures, parliaments, or cantonal government, cantonal parliament, national council, so first chamber of the federal parliament, or Council of State, the second chamber of the federal parliament. So you see the evolution. I will not go into details, but you see that we are more or less today slightly above 30% in the cantonal governments or parliaments, and slightly under 40%. The highest being the green one, which is the municipal executives. Okay, but still, considering that the share of women in a society is about 52%, this is clearly a descriptive underrepresentation. I didn't find a figure about, of course, this is the output, who is elected, but you also have to look at the input, the number of candidates. So I didn't find the figures where, for all these political bodies, we will have these statistic. But I did find, just as an example, in the last elections, federal elections for the National Council, about 41% of candidates were women. And about perhaps 39% were finally elected. I mean, in the parliament, National Council, there is about 39%. So you see, even at the point of the level of the input, the number of candidates, women are underrepresented with regard to their share in the society, which is usually around 52%. A similar thing concerning people with immigrant origin. Here I did a major studies, it's a bit covered there with my colleague Leah Potman. This one was published in Comparative Political Studies journal, where we looked at the difference between the share of people with immigrant origin among candidates in different cantons. This is in the elections also to the National Council, and their share among the elected. So you see, unfortunately, here we don't have some kind of average for whole of Switzerland, but yeah, like let's take the canton of Bern. We are here in Bern. So among candidates in the 2015 elections to the National Council, about 10% of them had the immigrant origin according to our coding. Swiss names, non-Swiss names, not going into details. 10%. And among those who were elected in the canton of Bern, there are 4%. Okay. And now we know that in the Swiss population, who have the Swiss passport and the right to vote, okay, among approximately 20% are of immigrant origin. Okay. So 20% in the canton of Bern, 10% are candidates, elected 4%. Okay. This article study that I did with Leah Portman, it's actually on the topic of electoral discrimination. We try to show how this can be explained, at least partially, through the fact that in Swiss elections, voters can cross off names on their ballot. So they can express negative preference votes for certain candidates, and they can also accumulate or do the panachage, so express also positive preference votes for candidates. And we found that all other things equal, if you have a non-Swiss name as a candidate, you have slightly less chances to be positively discriminated, so to say, and slightly more chances of being negatively, so being crossed off. Okay. But this is the topic of this study. If you're interested in this study, you will find a reference, or you can Google Portsmouth electoral discrimination. You will find it open access. Okay, so
Just interested about the definition of migration background. So, are we talking about first generation also having a migration background, or is that nearer defined? So, do we take in the background of, I don't know, per se, my grandfathers, even though my parents are born in Switzerland, so it is still an individual.
Okay, so you have an official definition of what is migration background. In the Swiss Federal Statistic Office, they have an official definition. It's a bit complicated to explain now because there are many options. It depends where you were born, if when you were born you were already Swiss national or not, if you were born in Switzerland or abroad, if one of your parents had Swiss nationality at birth or not. It's a bit complicated, but there is an official definition. In our case, for our study, it was impossible to do that because we would have, to make interviews with 4,000 people and ask them, and not all of them would accept, etc., etc. So we used the proxy method. And the proxy being that we looked at there's an official register of Swiss surnames, so all surnames that were Swiss until 1940 or 1960, I think. And so we use that to separate names that are Swiss names from non-Swiss names. We did do then a robustness check. So we did ask at a sample of candidates, but not everybody responded. We did ask these very precise questions, so to see how our proxy method matches with a real official definition. And we did find that our method was quite good. I think in about 70% of cases they matched. But even more importantly, it's actually not so important to know exactly if somebody's of migration background according to the definition, because according to our hypothesis, the voter who sees the names, he or she doesn't know. There are people like what's the name of this SVP national? Yvette Esterman. So she's Yvette Esterman. It's a Swiss last name. But she's actually born in Slovakia as Iveta and not Yvette, and not as Esterman, but I don't know what name. And so, you know, a voter does not know on that basis. Okay. On the other hand, you can have you know, surname that sounds foreign, but perhaps you don't have migration background. But the idea is that if voters really discriminate against candidates, especially without necessarily knowing the candidates, and in the Swiss election that's often the case because you have many candidates that you can vote for, and it's impossible to know them all. The idea is that if somebody really wants to discriminate, he or she will discriminate probably on the basis of the last name, or first and last name combined. Okay. But let me now turn on. It's a bit difficult now to read everything, but this is the this is a table. Oh, thanks. With our mini publics in different places of Switzerland. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The additional 4 that we did, we still didn't have time to complete the table. But basically, here you can see how many people were randomly invited. No, sorry, how many people were in the final group, in the mini public, between 20 and 30, okay? But how many of them, how many citizens were randomly selected in the first step? And then the information whether it was only Swiss or also foreigners included. Sometimes we even know that they were like separated, but don't go into too many details. This is important. The question, how many of them replied? But some people, of course, reply, "Oh, many thanks. I would love to participate, but I cannot. I'm not free on that weekend, or I have some health issues." Or many elderly people said, "Oh, I'm so happy that you invited, but I'm too old. And let's have young people discuss, and not me. I'm 85." Etc. So this figure is important. So how many of those invited said yes, I want? So we have an average of 8%. The international average in Belgium, Germany, and France is rather 4 or 5%. So with 8%, it's quite good. And then here we have statistics about the percentage of women who said, yes, I want. So this is EI, invitation accepted, and FP is final panel. But actually what we are interested in now is of those who accepted the invitation. So we have 50.3% of women. But as you've seen, in some cases it was higher, 44%. In other, it was a bit lower. But let's say it's quite accurate with regard to the actual figures in population, more or less. And in any case, it's about 10 percentage points above the figure that I showed you regarding the women among candidates for elections. And even more if you look at women among the elected representatives. And this is even more striking that people with immigrant origin. Here it's a bit both foreign citizens or Swiss citizens of immigrant origin. And here we could really do, to address your question again, we could really know exactly, because these people had to fill out the questionnaire where we asked the questions allowing us to say if they are of immigrant origin or not. It's more than 40%. And again, knowing that having those figures that I showed you before about the percentage of people with immigrant origin among candidates for election or among the elected, this is of course very interesting. Now, we are actually now working on we have different methods to try to explain what explains this high interest of women and immigrant origin people in mini publics. Unfortunately, I don't have results to show you now because we are doing this research right now. We are doing it through different methods. We do a survey of, we send an online survey to all those people who answered, yes, I want. And then we, in the end of the survey, ask if they are also ready or willing to have a interview with us. So we have also been conducting interviews with a selection of these people to get to know more about their motives. With a special focus, but not exclusive, because we also need men who are not of immigrant origin in order to make some comparisons, but with a special focus on women, generally speaking, and on immigrant origin people also. We finished interviews in French and in Italian for Ticino, and now we need to do them in German as well. But these are basically the main models that might explain. I have all of the slides for all these models. I don't have so much time, also because I want to have some exchange with you. These are classical models that explain participation of citizens in politics. For instance, rational choice model, it could be that given the fact that we do offer some small compensation for participating in publics, it's not so high, it's like 150 francs per day, which is according to Swiss standards, it's really very, very symbolic, 8 hours of work. But we were really inspired by the so-called release system in Switzerland, basically saying that especially at global levels of government, citizens are expected to engage some kind of voluntarily. And if you're like a member of a local parliament or city parliament, you don't have a salary. You do receive some compensation, perhaps 100 francs for one meeting or something like that, depends on the municipality. But it's rather symbolic. So we use the same system for. But perhaps this might explain, knowing that there's some correlation with socioeconomic inequalities and immigrant background and gender, it could be one of the possible explanations. There's a question of research, what are personal resources, educational background, and so socialization, if you were born in a family where already your parents were interested in politics, etc. There's some psychological models about your personality traits that might explain that some people are more interested in politics. Mobilization, perhaps the fact that in Switzerland 2019 or 20, there was quite a lot of mobilization for gender equality, the women strike and so on and so on. This might have, so these are many more models, and each of these models gives us a set of hypotheses to test. Again, unfortunately, I don't have and I don't want to show some preliminary result that perhaps will not be confirmed later on. But perhaps if you invite me in 2 years, I might come again and show you hopefully the results and publications. Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. How do we do? Thank you so much. It was really, really interesting. And also starting from the point of addressing the crisis of democracy through democratic innovations. There's really a search globally of these democratic experiments, which I find really interesting. More interesting even maybe in a place where direct democracy exists and is used so much. So I find it really fascinating how also in a place like this, like Switzerland, democratic innovations can bring something, and we can see what they bring. And then I think that maybe I will stop just here to leave the floor to you and also to the people that are connected online. And then maybe if I have time, I will ask you something. Otherwise, we will do it.
Is there somebody online?
Yeah, we have almost 10 people online.
What's the last question?
Not yet, but
Then the floor is first here.
yeah.
Thank you very much. It was super interesting. Okay, I'm a lawyer, not a political scientist. My question would be, how was the reaction of authorities with respect to these mini publics? Was the first reaction rather reluctant or open or hesitating?
Basically, you have two sorts of politicians, elected politicians, or also members of public administrations, if you want. You have those who are enthusiastic, and you are those who are very critical. And let's start from those who are very critical. As you might expect, those who are very critical, they are critical of the method of sortition per se. Especially, if you are elected, you say, well, I was elected, I have some legitimacy, people voted for me, and these people, they don't represent anyone. And then, of course, we have to explain, well, no, it's a different concept of representation, and you represent in some terms, but perhaps the parliament is non-representative in terms of gender, descriptively non-representative, and that's also a problem. And this is something that many publics can fix. So basically, it's not, sortition should not be seen as something against elections, so many publics should not replace parliaments, but they might become some kind of complementary tool. And again, on the other side, you have people who are enthusiastic. So the fact that we could do all these mini publics after our pilot in Sion, it's precisely because people, either from public administrations or sometimes really members of cantonal governments who saw that in the newspapers, contacted us and said, oh, we think that's a great thing. We've been struggling to find ways of, better integrating our population into political processes. So we are willing to do that also in our canton or in our city. That's why we could do after Sion, Canton of Geneva did that actually twice. City of Lausanne, Canton of Zurich wanted to do it in 3 cities of Zurich. The Canton of Aargau. They really came to us.
Maybe if there's still no one who wants to jump in. I was really interested in the fact that you presented some hypotheses on the effect of many publics on democracy. I was wondering if these hypotheses, like improving the quality of decisions, enhancing trust in politics, reduce polarization and promote equality, were tested or can be tested, and which were the results in case?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of studies, but very, very, very recent, because this is very, very recent and rapidly growing field of research. And so, yes, there are studies showing that polarization decreases within a mini public, that the trust in authorities increases within a mini public. The more trickier is to find the connections between mini public and maxi public, and to what extent this connection work. And here we have the findings are some findings go also into the direction that I said. It improves the quality and increases trust and so on. Others are more skeptical, but this is really work in progress, such question. But this is, of course, a very big challenge, is how to connect the results from mini public to maxi public. Because we have, based on the surveys that we do with the participants of mini public, we really know that the people who do this experience, they are extremely happy after this experience. Their interest for politics increases. Their understanding of how politics is complex is also increases, and so on. Yeah.
I have another question with respect to the self-organization of the mini publics. Is there a kind of a professional guidance, or is it organization?
Very good point. We absolutely need, and we always had, professional facilitators. Because, yes, you need some, in order to have this deliberative method work, well, you need professional facilitators. These facilitators must absolutely be impartial with regard to the topic. And we have some quality checks. We always ask the participants after each weekend of works, they have a questionnaire, and one of the questions is, were organizers or facilitators impartial, experts as well. So yes, you need professional facilitators. Then, of course, you can have some, especially when they have like when they work in groups, you can leave them organize themselves. But you always have to pay attention. As we all know, there are some people who tend to dominate discussions, debates, and others who are more shy. And it's a role precisely of these facilitators to make sure that those who tend to dominate, to hold them a little bit and to give, to encourage people who are perhaps shy but still have a lot to say to participate. Yeah. But this also explains that these exercises, they are not for free. They cost something. So if you want really to have a proper design with professional facilitators, also to give some small compensation to participants. Let's say you have about 25 people during 2 weekends, etc. It can easily cost around 40,000 Swiss francs, which again, not so much if we look at other costs of politics. How much does it cost to organize a referendum and everything costs, but it's a question where you want to.
Yeah, it always counts. Because also we had some kind of other connections when I was working at the canton of Fribourg, and we were trying to organize something, some parliamentary experiments for children, actually, for younger children. We were considering the use of draw also to select children, but then the cost issue also emerged. So it's absolutely something to take into account. There's a question from Federica Cristani, who's leading the Human Rights Justifications project with Elisa Cornalet.
Okay.
The question is, I was wondering, do you think mini publics might work also in other countries other than Switzerland? And in general, which main challenges have you encountered in organizing and conducting mini publics?
Thanks. Good question. I mentioned that at some point. Actually, in Switzerland, we were late with mini publics. There is much more things happening in Germany, in Belgium. Belgium actually even institutionalized mini public 4 years ago in the German-speaking community. So there is a Bürgerrat, city council, randomly selected 24 people, which is now one of the official bodies of the German-speaking community in Belgium. Okay. In Belgium, in Ireland, they connected it with referendums. In Canada, actually, what we did when we started with the horizontal model, so connecting mini public with referendums, we actually deliberately used something that was invented in Oregon in the United States in early 2000 years. So we got inspiration from Oregon, and we wanted to replicate Oregon. So yes, we were rather late. Challenges, well, one of the challenges abroad, a bit less in Switzerland, we didn't have so many problems with that, but a couple of occasions, is to mini publics could be used, especially in the vertical model. They can be used by governments, some kind of alibi exercise to show how we are so open for citizen participation, let them discuss, etc. But in the end, their recommendations, we don't really care. This is a little bit something that happened in France when there was the whole Gilets jaunes movement, yellow thing movement, after a decision of parliament that many people did not like, etc., etc. Some of these manifestations were even violent, putting fire, etc. And it lasted for months. And at some point, Macron
somebody, I even know who told me, somebody from Belgium told him about these mini public sector. And so he said, oh, great, let's do a French citizens assembly, randomly selected 150 people to discuss about climate change, etc. And so they came up with 151 recommendations. And many of these recommendations, even though Macron kind of promised, oh, I will, try to implement that, or I will put it on referendum, and then people decide. There was no referendum. Very few things were implemented, and so it can be, in that case, actually, if it is used an alibi, it can be counterproductive, because actually it can even decrease trust in institutions. So that's why it's important to have at least some kind of written engagements of public authorities to exactly, and we succeeded in some of our, like Winterthur, for instance, the authorities really engaged they said, okay, we cannot promise that we are going to implement everything. We don't know what will come, and this is, they are not an elected body, etc. But we will study these recommendations. 6 months later, we will provide a report. If there is something that we cannot implement, we will say why. This is, I think, a maximum that you can get.
I don't know how much time. Okay, okay. We have to close our meeting, even if we have, I think, so many other questions. And it's a first meeting that maybe allows us to know more about that and maybe discuss more about that in the future. So thank you very much, Professor Stojanović, for being with us today. And I hope to see you all in our next gender lectures. We will have the next ones only online until December. In December, we will have 2 other hybrid lessons. So thank you very much, everyone, also the people attending online, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.